Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Intersect USA podcast, where we celebrate all things faith, art, and community. My name is Ben Nizer. I'm an evangelical Christian, and I am joined today by my friend
Hailey Rose.
And what is your faith affiliation, Hailey Rose?
I'm a Christian. I am Presbyterian.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I can't remember how long we've known each other, but it's been
like 2 years.
Yeah,
probably.
Something like that. You've always been a person that's interests me and wanted to know more about you and your faith background. And I think our audience is going to also be very intrigued by your story and hopefully learn something today from your story. So tell us a little bit more about just your faith story. You say you're a Christian, Presbyterian, all that. Tell us a little bit more about how you came, to the particular faith that you hold.
So when I'm from Canada, so that's where I grew up. I just moved out here a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was probably 8 or 9, I'm not exactly sure how old I was. One of my friends invited a bunch of us to go to this thing called GEMS. It's Girls Everywhere Meeting the Savior.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at a Dutch Reformed church,
Mm-hmm.
which I didn't really even know what that was until a couple of years ago. But
Mm-hmm.
at the time, that's where it was. And so me and a bunch of my little kid friends went, and it really stuck with me. And I remember there was one night where we were in little groups kind of like with our age, and the counselor, she said, if you truly want a life with Christ, if you truly want salvation, if you truly want to know God, then you need to pray and ask Christ to come into your heart and forgive your sins. And she kind of really made me feel like I knew what sin was, even from a young age. Just the fact that even you can even just like look at someone and have a bad thought, and that's something that separates you from God.
Yeah.
And even just that at that young age, like I got that, and I got that I needed I needed God to take that away.
Yeah.
And so that night I went home and I said, like, Jesus, please come into my heart. Please save me from these sins I've committed and the things that I know that I'm going to do in the future.
Yeah.
And from there on, I've always believed, but I didn't start going to church until I was 19.
Okay.
Because my family doesn't really go to church, kind of like nominal Christians.
And you say you're from Canada. Where specifically in Canada?
Prince Edward Island.
Yeah.
It's on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the population of Prince Edward Island?
It's actually I used to think it was like really small, but after hearing about small towns in America, it's actually like not that small. There's probably on the island there's like 140,000 people or something like that. I feel like if people that actually know if that's wrong are going to be mad at me, but and our city, like the general area of our city is probably like, if you go out a bit, it's probably like 70,000.
Okay.
Which it's a good size. It's not too small, I guess.
Yeah. How many Christians would you say were in your town of 70,000 people?
I don't know. Probably not that many.
Yeah. I mean, if you were just to ballpark it.
So we do have a lot of churches. Like right in our downtown area, there's like a church on every corner almost.
Yeah.
But if you go into the church, it's mostly older people.
Mm-hmm.
And there definitely is young Christians. It's just there's not as many.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I don't know about the rest of Canada, but I find that where I'm from, at least, the Christians the people that actually like go to church and value kind of living the life of a Christian or like of a religious person for like Roman Catholics. There's a lot of Roman Catholics in PEI. That's like mostly that's mostly what's there in terms of like religious people. There's some Anglicans, some Baptists, Presbyterians, pretty much everything. It's just that there's way less. But I find that it kind of stopped with like my grandparents' generation. Like my parents' generation and us and the people after my parents' generation kind of are like the Christmas, Easter, kind of go to church.
Yeah.
with the grandparents,
Mm-hmm.
but the grandparents go every week. So I
Yeah.
feel like actually caring about going to church and that sort of thing kind of stopped
Yeah.
generationally a couple generations ago.
Yeah.
However, that's not to say that there isn't a lot of committed Christians. It's just that there's so few.
Yeah. And so for you at 19, you say at that point you start going to church. What spurred that
It
decision
was
on?
actually I met Anthony,
Who
probably
is
my husband.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I met him about 6 months before we started going to church,
Yeah.
and I had always believed
Mm-hmm.
in Jesus, and I just, for some reason, I just didn't think it was necessary
Yeah.
for me to be going to church. I thought that I believe, so why do I need to go and like prove myself, kind of a thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really understand what the point of church was, because the only churches that I had really grown up seeing were the Catholic Church, and that's a lot different
Mm-hmm.
than like a Presbyterian or a Baptist church or something. And so that's kind of all I knew, and I was like, I don't really want like to tell a man in a box how I feel or like my sins. So I
Yeah.
just kind of, and my dad even was like, I don't want you to have to do that either.
Yeah.
So I just kind of like distanced myself from church. But when I had started talking to Anthony, he was kind of on a faith journey himself, and so he kind of was thinking about these things a lot, and thinking about and critically thinking and asking me a lot of questions in terms of, well, why do you believe that, or like why don't you go to church, or why don't you do these things, or why do
Yeah.
you do these things. And as someone who called myself a Christian, I was kind of thinking, well, if I do really believe that the Bible's true, which
Mm-hmm.
I would say if someone asked me, then I probably should start looking at it more seriously. I should probably read it. I should probably do what it says and go to church and have a community of other believers that I can use in my life, and that can use me in their lives, and
Yeah.
and these sorts of things. And I just kind of, it was actually through conversations with him
Mm-hmm.
that I came to that realization that I
Yeah.
did need to go to church, and that it was a good thing to do.
Yeah.
And so we started going to church probably 6 months after we started like hanging out and dating and stuff.
Yeah.
And we just picked the church because it was really close to his apartment, and we we didn't really know like where to go, and it was a Presbyterian church. It just so happened to be a Presbyterian church, and
Yeah.
that's where we've stayed over the years.
And what was the size of the congregation? Just because I'm just curious to, and for a lot of people who might be watching or listening, like, a church of several hundred people is the norm for them. So, like, what was the church
Uh,
size?
the building is very big and very nice and
Yeah.
can fit several hundred people, but probably like 50 people.
Yeah.
And that's including the choir, which was like almost half
Yeah.
of the people.
Yeah.
So it's pretty small, yeah.
Yeah. And would you say that that was pretty much the case, kind of across the board denominationally on Prince Edward Island?
I I honestly don't really know that much about other churches, so I'm not
Yeah.
sure. But I do know that I think most churches are pretty small. Like, I don't
Yeah.
think there's many churches that have like hundreds and hundreds of people. I'm
Yeah.
sure there might be like one or two that are popular churches that have more people than others, like
Mm-hmm.
that young people like or whatever. But I don't know for sure. But I know that a lot of the kind of older churches and that sort of thing have very few people.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the Catholic churches have a lot of people.
Okay.
But because that, as I said, that's kind of like the most predominant
Right.
religion
Mm-hmm.
in Prince Edward Island is
Yeah.
definitely Roman Catholicism.
Yeah. So what is it like for you, like growing up as someone who's a Christian, then you start going to a Presbyterian church, like, just what was it like? Was it weird? Were you more of an outcast to people if you claimed biblical Christianity? Like, what was it like to be a Christian in?
Yeah, yeah. I kind of started around that same point. I kind of started being more, I guess, vocal about my faith as well, because
Mhm.
as I was saying, I kind of was like, if I believe this, I need to be more serious about it. I've
Mhm.
always believed it, but it's not just the belief, it's the living
Yeah.
the belief, right? And so I kind of was more vocal about it, and I was kind of living my life in a way that I think people would notice that I was more living out my Christian faith, I guess, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to follow Christ and that sort of thing. And I would mention it. I would mention that I go to church. I would mention what I believe, and it was kind of weird because it was kind of just something that was just kind of a personal thing
Mm-hmm.
that I didn't really mention unless someone literally just came out and asked, "What do you believe?" Then I would say, "I'm Christian, I guess," kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it was kind of weird at first because I kind of took this turn of like I want to be more vocal about it, and people honestly, I have pretty good. Most of my friends at home are not Christians, but I have pretty good friends, and no one ever really got on my case about it. Some people would like make funny jokes about me or like make not really like in a mean way, just kind of like, oh, you're like the Christian one or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was never in a mean way. Like I actually got really lucky with, because I've heard lots of stories where people's families or friends have disowned them for being Christian and
Right.
disowned them because they have strong beliefs. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any friends or family who've ever even really like argued with me about why do I believe that. I think that they think it's a good thing that I believe it. So
Yeah.
I've been lucky in that way, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking there's a lot of people that, especially here in the States, that when they hear a little bit of your story there of like, okay, you're in a town in an area of like 70,000, in a, I guess, is that a province?
Yep, Prince
Okay,
Edward
yeah,
Island. Yeah,
province. So, and you're in a province or like what we would look at as a state
yeah,
of
and it's
100,
also an island too.
right, of 150,000
Yeah,
people per se, that you've got really just like a handful of churches in a town of 70,000, and those churches are maybe running 50 to 75 people in their congregation. So like maybe you've got in a town of 70,000 people 200 or 300 Christians, right?
yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of places here in the States that would go, whoa, like that's like one church, and we
yeah,
have in our town of 70,000, we have 35 churches that have 300 people in them that are claiming Christianity. You know what I'm saying? Like, so like what you're talking about is such a far
yeah,
departure from, I would say, what most people would consider the norm, you
yeah.
know? So here's a couple things. These might be strange questions for you, but again, I think our audience might understand what I'm getting at.
Sure.
Did you, in the church that you were part of, did it have like a children's ministry or a youth ministry or anything along those lines, a college ministry, like age appropriate kinds of
There was
things?
like a youth group.
Yeah.
I think it was very small. I think there was only a few people in it, but
Yeah.
there was a youth group. But other than that, um, it was there's just not that many people like young people in the church. Like the church
Yeah.
that we went to, most of the people that go there were like older than my parents' generation kind of
Yeah.
thing. There was a few people that were younger,
Mm-hmm.
especially like by the time we left, there was a
Mm-hmm.
few more people.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just very different, like generationally. Like
Mm-hmm.
we went to the church and started going and we liked it, so we stayed. But there was for a few years, but we were the youngest people there for a long time.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's nice because you can learn from people and there's
Yeah.
older people to talk to, but at the same time, it's not, I didn't really make any Christian friends
Mm-hmm.
my age because of that
Right.
until one girl who I became friends with right before probably just like 6 months before I moved here. She joined, I was in the choir in, at that church,
Mm-hmm.
and she joined the choir probably 6 months before I moved here and was a Christian as well. And she was like literally the only other Christian friend that I had other than one of mine and Anthony's friends.
Yeah.
Like that was it.
Yeah. Well, and again, you're painting the picture, I think, for a lot of people to understand the situation that you come from. It's not this like dire situation, but like, you know what I'm saying, that like your experience is vastly different than what, I'd say 75% of the United States is like.
Yeah. And I think too, it's not that there is no Christian community, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that if I had grown up in a church, I would have probably had friends that were like I would have probably had like a group of Christians that I know,
Mhm.
because I grew up with some people that were Christian like in school and stuff, and I
Yeah.
know that they had a Christian community.
Mhm.
It's just probably a lot smaller of a community than
Right.
like in the South or something,
Right.
where there's churches everywhere and everyone goes to church.
Yeah.
And as I said as well, like there's a lot of churches in Charlottetown, and that's our city. There's a lot of churches there. It's just that I think they're kind of sparsely populated, and I think a lot of the people that do go, it's kind of just like, I'm going because I have to, or I'm going because that's what I do. I go to church.
Right.
It's not as introspective. At least,
Yeah.
like, and I don't want to speak for people, so I don't know if that's the case for sure. But
Right.
at least I know a lot of the people that I knew growing up that went to church on the weekends or went to
Mhm.
church on Christmas or whatever. They just went because that's what you do. You go to church. Like they didn't really
Right.
think about what it means or what they actually believe.
Mhm.
And it's really important to do that, and that's kind of what I started figuring out when I was older. But as I said, it took me a long time of just kind of like, I do believe in Jesus. I know that Jesus is working in my heart, because there was things in high school there where I would feel convicted about things and other people wouldn't care, or
Yeah.
I would be cautious about something and other people wouldn't care. And so I've always had that changed heart since that first time.
Mhm.
And even before that, I believed in God. Like when I was a little tiny kid, my parents would tell
Sure.
me Jesus was God and these sorts of things, and I believed it. It's just that ever since that night at Gems,
Mhm.
I believe that's when my heart was changed, and I was being continually sanctified. It's just that when I really started to make it intellectual as well was when I was 19. Because
Yeah.
before that, it was just kind of a personal thing in my heart. And I
Mhm.
didn't think I needed to read the Bible. I just thought, oh, the Bible's there. It's true. Whatever.
Mhm.
But then once I realized, if you're a Christian, you should probably be able to share your faith. You should probably know what you believe. You should probably get closer to God by reading his word. And when I started realizing all of these things and learning these things from other people,
Yeah.
that's when I started to kind of change my tune on church and all of those things, which
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for.
Yeah. Well, and to add to that, if we're a Christian, if we say this is what we believe, we want to be around other people that believe that too.
Exactly, yeah.
So I'm wondering if there's anything about your Christian community in Canada that you particularly miss, that you don't get maybe as much here. Is there anything like that?
Um, I didn't really have a Christian community.
Okay.
Like there is Christian communities there. I just didn't
Yeah.
really, other than my church, which wasn't the church I went to is a great church. I just didn't feel that cohesive with everyone there.
Mm-hmm.
Like I do kind of here, I guess,
Yeah.
and with the people I know here. But it was a great church. It was just that, yeah, I didn't have much of like an actual Christian community. I miss like being in the church, having a church choir, and being
Yeah.
able to kind of as a choir sing these really beautiful songs every Sunday to worship God, and everyone we would do hymns, and that was everyone, but just the choir would do pieces,
Mm-hmm.
and then everyone would kind of listen, and people really appreciated hearing that, and that was kind of a way for people to, I guess, reflect on God
Mm-hmm.
and without having to sing, whereas we would sing, and for me that was a way to reflect on my feelings and my faith and
Yeah.
that sort of thing, and it was a way for me to worship God because some of the pieces we did were really beautiful. And yeah, I miss being in a church choir. I thought that was really
Yeah.
a really good experience. But in terms of community, like
Yeah.
I wasn't really part, other than that church, I wasn't really part of like a Christian community
Mm-hmm.
thing.
And if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
26.
26. And you've lived here in the States for 2 years.
Yeah.
So really you were in church from 19 until 24,
Yeah.
right? And again, just it's such an incredible departure, I would say, culturally from what we see here in the States, which is this. The thing that you're saying that you miss is probably the thing that 19 to 24-year-olds here in the States would say that they could do without, which is a choir. Like, oh my gosh, choir is so old school. Like, gotta have the worship band,
Oh
gotta
yeah.
have,
Yeah.
gotta have the, the guitars and the drums and the,
Yeah.
all of that. Like if you're in a church that still has a choir, like, oh my gosh, like these are some old school people here. Like, I don't know if I want to go there. It's like it would be a turn off for some
Yeah.
people.
And
But
that's kind of part of the reason why I don't know if those churches that like did have the rock bands, if they had a
mhm,
lot more people at home. They actually might have. They might
yeah,
have had a couple hundred people. I'm
yeah,
not really sure.
yeah,
Like the ones that were more contemporary, because I do know that's more attractive to young people.
yeah,
So I think that me and Anthony were just kind of a fluke and started going to a very traditional,
yeah,
like our worship is very traditional and
hmm,
reformed kind of a thing.
yeah,
Um, and so maybe that's why the church was so devoid of young people.
yeah, maybe,
But
yeah,
yeah, but I do know that there were churches that had a lot more people. It's just that especially in town, there
hmm,
wasn't that many. I even know of churches that are in kind of just the outskirts of town or like 20 or 30 minutes away
hmm,
that are good churches and that have probably a good amount of people.
yeah,
But it's just people are so non-religious
yeah,
and so like against religion,
hmm,
organized religion
right,
there, that especially in our town there's
hmm,
just not as many people.
yeah, yeah. So what would you say are, outside of some of
Sorry.
the things musically, right, that we've identified,
Right.
what would you say is like one of the bigger differences between kind of the culture of Christianity here and versus at home in Canada?
Well, again, I don't want to speak for other people that like kind of grew up in an actual Christian culture, because I think it might actually be kind of similar if I had grown up in like a church and in like a
Hmm.
kind of a weekly Christian routine kind of a thing. But especially for me, it was kind of like different because I didn't really do anything that was for my Christian life that wasn't just like by myself.
Hmm.
So like I didn't really like, here we have Intersect where you can go, and here we do things as a
Yeah.
group and reach out to people and
Hmm.
um meet up with other Christians and all these sorts of things. I didn't really do any of that at home.
Yeah.
I just kind of went to church on Sundays and read the Bible and talked to my husband and a couple of our friends about what we believed and that sort of thing. But it wasn't something that I really like. Even after I started going to church, I just didn't really know about how to like live it out.
Hmm.
I didn't really know about like organizations to join or how to do outreach to different people or whatever. I just didn't really. That just wasn't a part of
Yeah.
it there. And I think that it probably is for people that know how to do those things. It's just that, as I said before, there's so few people. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to find those things.
Right.
It's just hard to. If I had known about some of them, I might have been part of it.
Hmm.
It's just kind of hard to find those sorts of organizations, I think.
Yeah. And here it's just, you can get overwhelmed with it. You can get involved in so much stuff that's like,
Yeah, which is great.
yeah, yeah. Um, what would you say is the single most influential factor since moving to the States on like your spiritual growth? What would you say that is?
I think it's probably just meeting so many other Christians and seeing how they live their lives,
Mm-hmm.
and that's had a big impact on me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know how else to say it. Just yeah, just
Yeah.
like just seeing other Christians and spending time with other Christians and seeing like what they've overcome compared to like what I haven't overcome that much in my life, and I see these people that have had these really hard lives or have just had like a hard year or whatever, and they're so strong in their faith, and they're so um they have so much love for God and so much respect for God, and just seeing that and seeing how strong people are in their faith and seeing how much they do for others,
Mm-hmm.
that's really affected me, I think, and made me think a lot about my life, and I'm maybe not doing enough and those sorts of
Yeah.
thoughts.
I've heard you say before that here in Provo, Utah, or in Utah County, that this is the most Christians that you've ever been around.
Yeah, at least like our age, especially.
Yeah.
Like,
and make the distinction, born again, evangelical, Christians, preaching
yeah,
the
people that
Bible.
want to share their faith, people
Yeah.
that want to go out and people who actually believe that Christianity is true
Mm-hmm.
and not just like an option.
Yeah. Yeah. But
People
see, even
believe.
that is saying something for people that know kind of the Utah County, Provo, Orem area. Like,
Yeah.
for some of us who've moved, to this area from other places, like, this is the least amount of evangelical Christians we've ever been around, like, by
Yeah,
far.
and that's why it's so funny because
Yeah.
me and Anthony we always hear people say like there's so few Christians here, like there's so wow, like
Mm-hmm.
we just needed the gospel's needed so bad here. And it is and so I don't want to make a joke about that because it really is. It's needed everywhere.
Yeah.
But we just know so many more Christians than we've ever known.
Yeah.
And like we feel like there's such an amazing big Christian community and it's like really great
Yeah.
and nice for me
Yeah.
for me.
Well, and again, that's just, again, further painting the picture of kind of what you've come out of at
Yeah.
Prince Edward Island is really, really by the grace of God, that
Yeah.
He's called you out of darkness into light and made you His, and yeah, I just think that's really, really cool, to know
Me
that.
too.
Is there something that you see here in the States that you and maybe even Anthony have made this observation in 2 years being here? Is there something that you think Christians here care way too much about or focus way too much on?
I don't know exactly what you're getting at, but like maybe like looking good, maybe like
Okay.
not like physically,
Yeah.
but like outward kind of like I have to look like I'm a good person,
Yeah.
which I think is a particularly big problem in Utah.
Sure.
But just in general, I think that's kind of something, and not even just here in Utah, like just what I've heard about the Christian culture in the US in general,
Mhm.
I've just heard that people care a lot about what other people think.
Yeah.
People think that to be a Christian, people have to look at me and think I'm a good person, or I can't share my faults. I can't share
Mhm.
my sins. When really, Christians, we should be sharing our faults and our sins with each other because
Yeah.
that's how we can grow out of it and that's how we can help others with their problems.
Yeah. And really the gospel would speak into that, knowing that, like, the first pillar of the gospel, if you will, is our sin. It's that falling short,
Exactly.
of the mark.
That's why we
So,
need it.
right. And so if we say, yeah, we believe in the gospel, but yeah, we don't want to talk about our sin struggles, like, you go, well, wait a minute, like,
Right, exactly.
that's the 800-pound elephant in the room. We all know that we sin. Why don't we talk a little bit more openly about it and share with one another and bear one another's burdens, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so final question. Given your background, growing up in, relative isolation compared to, again,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
what we have here, all the things programmatically, from birth to death, a lot of churches have age appropriate ministries and
Yeah.
things along these lines, but for you, kind of growing up in isolation and very few Christians around, what do you think? What would be like advice that you would give Christians, here in the States about what it was like growing up, with that, like what you had to do in order to grow spiritually? Does that make sense when I'm asking there?
Kind of. I'll try and answer it and then
Okay, yeah.
and then if you don't think it's sufficient, you can tell me. Yeah, I would say like use the people around you. Like if you have a good Christian community, lean on those people and like share your struggles with them and ask about their struggles and just lean on each other, because that's something that I didn't really do or have in terms of like a Christian community.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do move back home, that's something that we'll probably look for.
Yeah.
Like we'll probably look for a church that has a church that has a good, strong Christian community and people of all ages and
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing, because everyone can learn from each other. And
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Well, I appreciate you. I appreciate your honesty
Thank you.
and sharing a little bit of your story, and hopefully those that are listening or watching have learned something too. So, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope that you would continue to share and like and comment below if you have any questions for myself or for Hailey. We'd be happy to answer any of those questions. So thanks, and we will see you next time. Bye.